let's talk about this. Let's talk a little bit about the numbers here. So we saw in Iowa that, he crossed 50%. Haley and DeSantis picking up the lion's share of the rest. And this time again, he crosses 50%, and Haley again gets the balance of the rest. But, in looking at some of the exit polling from last night, Tom, this is where, again, I think that there's a time bomb inside Trump's coalition, such as it is, which is 29% of people who said they voted for Haley identified as conservatives. That's a massive red flag for the Trump campaign. And I'm wondering, to your point about the Las Avitas and the Susies of the world, is like, they're always going to be, all sorts of bravado because that's the expectation. But as they're sitting there looking at the numbers, right? I think in Iowa and New Hampshire, which are both, very, very white by ethnicity, but very different by temperament and by ideology, right? A conservative in Iowa is powered by God. A conservative in New Hampshire is powered by live free or die, right? They're almost 180 degrees apart, right? They see the world very differently. So 30% of self-identified conservatives go to Haley. Like, Trump can't afford that. It's a long way of saying, like, it does not appear to me that Trump has yet done the one thing that would, in fact, make him a truly viable general election candidate, which is he has not consolidated his own party.
100% that. I noticed early in the race that they were doing coalition work. They were building coalitions, especially when they went to work early on the evangelicals. Remember that Ralph, there's, 1,000 of these conferences. There's probably like 5 a day. And they all seem to sell well. It's amazing.
I know. It's really, I just finished The Power Worshippers by Catherine Stewart. And I'll tell you this just as an aside, because I know you've written about this world too. The number of groups, right, is staggering. The number of people, like, it's like 12 or 15, almost all men, like, who run all of this stuff. And there's a Leonard Leo's, and then a whole passel of people you've never heard of. It's an incredibly, they're everywhere, Tom, but I'm sorry. Go ahead on the coalition.
Yeah, no, right. It's, I don't want to fall too far down the rabbit hole, but, there was a moment where it seemed like evangelicals were, if they weren't entirely with Trump, they might even break away from Trump back at the beginning of the year. This is the heady days of after 2022 when, you had Republicans talking about how much they did not like losing. And of course, that vanished once Ron DeSantis became a person and, stepped off the off air and onto the trail. But I about fell out of my chair when John Hagee introduced Nikki Haley. He's like the second coming of Falwell and Robertson. He's that's, I guess, second or third gen televangelist, Robert Jeffress. Remember Robert Jeffress did not fall in line behind Trump either. But one big tell was that Faith and Freedom Coalition meeting, I feel like it was June or July of last year, where Ralph Reed gave Donald Trump just primo space. I think they put Ron DeSantis on a Friday afternoon at lunchtime, and Trump headlined the dinner on Saturday night. And there was Mike Huckabee up on stage with him. There's Ralph Reed, all the brass of the politicized evangelical movement. And I think we got the clear answer for why out of Iowa, which is that it's the evangelicals are with Trump. They weren't 8 years ago. It changed. And that kind of speaks to how profound the Republican Party has changed in 8 years with him, especially with the cultural evangelicals. But the irony here is that fast forward to New Hampshire, which is what he needed to win and started his winning streak in 2016. It's been inverted now, where you have a lot of those independents aren't with Trump anymore. The new people that he brought in, the New Hampshire, the dynamic is flipped coming out of New Hampshire. And to the broader point of what you're saying here with the general, this has always been the concern. Remember, I wrote about this in the book The reason that Reince Priebus and Paul Manafort pushed Mike Pence so heavily for the ticket was because it was a turnout. It was voter turnout. They were worried that the Midwest evangelicals were going to stay home and it would turn into a bloodbath for all the Republicans. And so you need, and this builds into this bigger discussion that we're seeing growing, in which Trump is pushing very hard about the Veep stakes. What do you add? And this is how I look at it going forward. Who do you add to the ticket that fixes this, that brings back, or maybe ever brings in, suburbanites and old line conservatives? Because the old line conservatives, kind of the ideological conservatives, not really the cultural, they're just not with Trump.
Well, yeah, and let me ask you that, because I was thinking about that last night as someone who, came up in the Republican Party, worked for George W. Bush in, 97, 98, 99, 2000, you name it, all the first really 7 years of my career going back to college, is I wonder if for those kinds of Republicans, let's call it those Bush Republicans, whether it's 41 or 43, that Nikki reminds them of what they used to have, right? She's not perfect, but it's a reminder of a time was that was a party I could be a part of. And then they have to look at Trump and say, and now that's what I have. And I got to be honest with you, Tom, I think, again, going back to the weakness, and I think it is a weakness in Trump's coalition, is yes, you may have more evangelicals, although I do think it might be less than it was. I think you do have a lot less, for lack of a better way to put it, moderate Republicans and conservative-leaning independents who really want anything more to do with them. It's not to say that they're Democrats or even that they like Joe Biden. They're just like, I can't do this anymore. That's what I want. That's what I used to have. And I know I'm not going to get it back if this guy hangs around.
Yes, that's what I saw in Bedford, to the west of Manchester. That was the big district that Haley really needed to overperform, and that's where she spent the morning, Tuesday morning, glad handing with Chris Sununu over there. And that's what I heard from folks as they were leaving. Kind of it's just middle of the road, middle class. I talked with a former church secretary who was telling me, she and her husband have been voting religiously, for years, pardon the pun. They show up, right? And she said, and she was despondent. She was saying, I'm not going to vote for either one of them. And I heard that from a guy who used to be a baseball coach. He was in the Red Sox organization for a hot minute. The older folks, and then you go down to Nashua and you see the Trump coalition. And the Trump coalition is a little more blue collar, but they're already with them. And how do you bring that back? And, again, this goes to the Veep stakes calculations. I mean, one way you bring it back, or you try to bring it back, is what you see the campaign doing, which is trying to put a normalizing face on Trump, or at least present the operation writ large as normal.
Let me ask you this, because if you believe, look, we're inundated with polls, right? We're inundated with surveys. We're inundated with data. We're inundated with information. And what you hear from so many Americans is a great unease about their present and about their future. Although you saw in Axios last week a report that, people are now starting to suddenly feel a lot better about the economy, but there's still this general sort of unease, which isn't really surprising given that, we're only 4 years away almost, Tom, from, the beginning of the pandemic. We're in massive social, technological, economic upheaval, right? We've got wars going on, everything else. So some unease is not surprising. But if you're looking for a calming influence, Trump is going out every day and every night saying, I ain't going to be it. Right. And so, for people who are, emotionally, intellectually exhausted by everything, right? They're like, is this what I'm going to do again? I want to do this because, again, he tells you exactly what he wants to do, right? And it's not like peace, prosperity, milk and honey. Joe Biden's a good guy. Like, I want to take the country into, a bright future. It's like national abortion bans, Muslim deportation, putting homeless people in camps, right? Radical reorganization of the bureaucracy, evangelicals in places of power. Like, this is not where normal America, quote unquote, normal America is anymore. And to your point about the Trump coalition, it's older, whiter, more male than it used to be, but the country is less of all of those things.
Yes. Yeah, it feels like a demographic collision course. You can kind of see this, and you can see you see the anger rising there too. With the closer you get to that demographic deadline written about, where the U.S. is no longer a majority quote unquote white country. 2040, whenever that happens. A couple thoughts. One, I noticed, the campaign trying to keep the reins on it, and you really can't, because this is so cultural. As in Iowa last year, and is one of his things in Sioux City, and you can't really call it a rally because they packed 100 people into a small room in a convention center, which is like astounding that it was so few people.
Well, and as an old advance man, right, they're like closing in the bike rack and putting up drapes and everything else. So, right, like you can't see anything, right, on television, nothing prints but him, right?
Yes, which is, by the way, great advance work. Dean Phillips should invest.
Shit. Right.
I was taught, this guy shows up to the campaign, super Trumper. He's got a copy of his March '91 Playboy with Trump and Marla Maples on the front.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh yeah. And great condition too. It's very solid condition. Mm-hmm. And he was complaining afterwards. He said, "Man, I really wanted to get my photo with him. I wanted to get this signed. But they made me take off my shirt and put on a new one." I was like, "Well, why?" He said, "Oh, because the last shirt said Joe Biden."
Right.
And I'm like, "Oh, wait a minute. Dude, you are the energy. You're not allowed to say Joe Biden at a Trump rally?" Weird.
But Tom, this is to me the inevitable catch-22 as I see it. And of course, everything will change. But as I see it in this moment, is that everything that the Chris LaCivitas and Susie Wiles of the world need to do to normalize Trump necessarily pushes away guys like that, which is, he's not new anymore, right? He's older, and I want to get to that in a second. But then everything they need to do to get that guy back necessarily pushes away the otherwise normal human beings, right? Because they're like, I don't. It's always like, you're hanging out with the same crew that thinks like the Camp Auschwitz guy is like a good person, right? Like, is that what you want? And I think there's a lot of people who are like, no, that's not what I want. And so, yeah, it's like, okay, the Dobbs decision on abortion is the bumper that Republican dogs can't stop catching. They can't live with it, and they can't live without it. Trump can't live with it, can't live without it. But I believe, and you've seen him up close, frankly, more than I have, is instinctually he always wants to go back to the base because he knows they're the most loyal. So you talk about the Veep stakes, which is, it would make sense even in the context of a quote unquote contested campaign, which this really hasn't been, that Nikki Haley would make the most sense. But there's no possible way in my world, in my mind, in the universe in which we occupy, that he'll ever choose her.
He can't, because of who he is.
Yeah.
It's too personal for him. Everything's so personal.
Like Biden, remember that think about it. Like, remember Kamala Harris rabbit punched Joe Biden, I think in the first or second Democratic debate, right? Like on race, right out of the chute. And he bit his lip and he chose her, right? Trump doesn't have that gene.
No. You got to have somebody. This is, I wrote about this in my list I put out, and I'll update it again soon, seeing as we're even deeper into the Veep stakes now. You kind of saw these tryouts up here in New Hampshire. Elise Stefanik.
Too smart.
Does that apply?
Yes, because he doesn't like. I think that there's a whole bunch of different reasons why it won't be her. But I think most importantly is he. First of all, she will, if she's the VP nominee, she will want to have some modicum of control over strategy and everything else. She just can't help herself. And so my guess is that like the Susies and the Las Avitas of the world are like, can't be her. And New York doesn't get him anything.
Yes. Right. At the end of the day, there's a couple of things you got to hand. The factors are Trump's personality, and does it add? And, when I hear people talk about Tim Scott, I understand that that's a critical endorsement in the right moment. But as we all know, having watched Trump for 8 years now, you can do whatever is the perfect thing in the moment for him. And it does not translate transactionally later. It's gone in a minute. Tim Scott, I'm not sure adds anybody. You certainly don't need the South. The age balance doesn't really work. Certainly not the gender balance. Do you get black voters out of that? Maybe. Do you eat into the margins? Possibly. But I keep on hearing women. Kristi Noem's name comes up a lot. Who's interesting and who I hear independently? I've heard from a number of different corners. And just, since we both live in the fog-filled world of politics, one of the best ways to check these things is, does something come up unprompted? And are you certain that these people are not in the same network? Like for instance, if you were talking to Trump people who co-authored a book together, and you talk to one of them and they tell you something, you talk to the other one and they tell you the same thing, you don't really have two sources, you just got one. Ben Carson's name keeps coming up.
Huh.
That was my reaction. First time I heard that, and I was like, really?
Well, look, I mean, Ben Carson, before all of this, right, was a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon, right? But he doesn't give you, first of all, he doesn't give you, he's not a woman, obviously. But also, he's not young either, right?
Right. Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, it was explained to me once about him helping with evangelicals, and obviously he was out on the trail for Trump for a ton out in Iowa. So that could be a dated thing, but I was hearing it again after Iowa, which was really bizarre.
Right, because I mean, we know that despite again that sort of strikes against my intelligence, thing, but also. Total supplication is also necessary, right?
Yes, that. I mean, if you think about it, Mike Pence really was the perfect vice president for Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, who else is going to take the water bottle off the table immediately in sync with him? I was I was at a rally in South Carolina, actually the Tim Scott launch, fittingly enough. It was up in the crowd talking with some of his friends. And I mean, this was at his launch for campaign. One of them told me that, he's just not ready to be president, but he would be great as vice president. And I looked at the guy and I said, I was like, do you have any concerns about your friend joining the ticket given what happened to the last vice president? And that was kind of the end of that interview.